to another edition of Asian Times TV. We have with us today Sanjit Singh, who is actually an entrepreneur and a businessman, but he's also an author and a humorist. He has an MBA from UCLA, so he's a very serious guy, does serious things. But he's written a book that's very hilarious, very funny, and it deals with this whole large topic of, are you an Indian? A humorous guide to growing up as an Indian in America. Indian, of course, in the sense of East Indian, not Native Indian or Red Indian, but Indians who came, in large numbers to the United States after the immigration policy was changed in 1963, 64 by Kennedy and Johnson administration. So, Sanjit, welcome to Princeton TV. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Excellent, excellent. It's a great book. I quickly read through it. So tell me about the book, the kind of like how you came up with the idea to do the book.
Well, I think, my dad is a very funny individual. He grew up in the UK, even though he's Indian, of Indian descent.
Right.
So I think he grew up already a little bit of an outsider. And then I think he brought that into the family humorous way of looking at that. And I think I picked up on that at a young age, and I've always seen things in a funny way. I've also been interested in writing. And I thought, somebody told me a long time ago, they said, if you want to do something interesting, you could take two things that you like doing and smash them together. So for me, it was an interest in my Indian heritage and an interest in humor.
Right.
And it was sort of a natural fit. And I really like the idea that this really hadn't been done before. There's a lot of phenomenal Indian authors. I don't have to tell you, you're a phenomenal Indian author yourself.
Right.
But a lot of the topics they write about is serious, and I thought, there could be, a nice fit for a humor book in the space of Indian and American and that interface.
Absolutely, yeah. So you said your father grew up in the UK. Now, of course, UK has a long history of Indians, right, who've settled there for many, many years.
Right.
And clearly the British Asian population is kind of unique in the sense that they have mixed a lot of the cultures and made it their own.
Right.
So then your dad, you're saying, moved to the West Coast, is that right?
He did. Well, what's funny, to go back to what you said, back when he was there in the 30s and 40s, and not even in London, we're talking, Birmingham in the central England, the number of Indians were far fewer. There was just literally a few Indian families in town,
right.
And he was a turban Sikh, so he was very much a fish out of water at that point. I think now, if you're an Indian growing up in London, you're not even really an outsider. There's
right.
We have our own majority in certain parts of the city, at least. We're a majority. And then he and my mom moved, and my two brothers moved to New York,
mm-hmm.
and then eventually to the West Coast, which is where I was born and where I grew up.
So there's a quiz in here in your book.
Right.
Indian quick quiz. So
right.
Tell me what are some of the items on this quiz? In terms of, are you really an Indian?
Well, you got them. You could read them. They're funny to me. Do you ever find yourself walking out of the house with a giant little tick on your forehead?
Right.
Do your parents say things to you like, why don't you get straight A's like Priya?
Right.
Those are some of the items that I cover in the quick quiz. And I think the joke behind it is, if you answer 8 or more of them correctly, then you've been properly authenticated as a true Desi growing up in America.
Right. So the Lal Tika thing on your forehead, colloquially called a dot.
Right.
In the early days in New Jersey, right, and in New York, I'm sure, and California too. So what's now, of course, has become a bindi, and it's kind of become a fashionable thing to display, right? Recently, apparently, Selena Lopez, the teenage heartthrob,
right,
at the MTV Music, I think on MTV Movie Awards, displayed the bindi, and it became a political issue because the religious types got upset.
Right. That's interesting.
So the fact that it's becoming part of the mainstream, and of course Madonna, doing henna on her hands and arms and displaying them famously, also was in the discussion. And now there have been movies as well, right, about Hinduism kind of becoming vogue.
Right. Yeah, I guess Eat, Pray, Love would be
exactly. Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Yeah. I do talk about some things like that. I'm getting a lot of feedback, by the way. I can hear my voice. Um, so I do write about a lot of things like that in the book, like how yoga's been sort of transformed. I think a lot of great ideas have come to America from India. I mean, everything from, like you said, henna. We have paisley, the dot or the lal tikka,
Hmm.
and I am amused constantly by the way in Americans sort of put their own spin on everything and they
Yeah.
make it their own. Like now we have rock and roll yoga, classes, which almost defeats the original purpose of yoga. To calm the mind and be at one with the body, and yet Americans just put their own rock and roll spin on just about everything.
Right.
So to me, I find it humorous. I understand some people are offended by it, but um, I'm just fascinated by it.
So what's
It's
rock and roll yoga? I mean, I knew about the hot yoga, and there are quite a few studios in New York that turn on the sauna and do the yoga
right,
with the kind of the heat turned on, and
right,
it really makes you sweat a lot. You become more flexible. What's
right.
rock and roll yoga? Tell me.
I don't know that it's called that, but I think I've been to classes where they say, well, this class is kind of a mix of yoga and Pilates, or it's a faster yoga, and then sometimes they'll throw in music, and then all of a sudden you're listening to rock and roll while you're, holding a yoga position, which um, that just amuses me.
So you have this interesting kind of humorous chit chat between a yoga teacher and a student.
Right,
It's on page 121.
right.
Do you have the book there with you, or?
I don't have it right in front of me,
Okay.
but I
So
remember the conversation well.
yeah, so it says, I've noticed another curiosity about some American yoga teachers. They seem to feel awfully comfortable talking to me about things that only my doctor should. The other day I was holding a pose when I had the following conversation with my female yoga teacher. Yoga teacher says, "You really need to open your anal mouth." As in, I'm not sure what you mean. What? And the student says, "Come again?" And yoga teacher, "Your anal mouth? Can you open that up for me?" And the student says, "No, thank you. I'm good." No, was she using like like a yogic term for getting into a posture or something? I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
well, she was I think telling me that I needed to change perhaps how I was holding the post to get the maximum benefit.
I see.
And I think this was if I remember correctly, it was Bikram yoga,
All right.
and this particular instructor had said that she had gone to the Himalayas and studied with very wizened yoga sadhus, and um,
Right.
so I assume she knew what she was talking about. I had never been asked that by anyone to open my anal mouth. So
Right.
again, this is where um, perhaps they have these discussions in India. I'm not just aware of it, but to me, it's just more Americans approaching it from a certain angle that just makes me laugh and makes me find humor in it.
So the auntie phenomena. So talk about that. You said that you had a person attend your signing in Berkeley, Asian
Right.
American, not Indian American, and
Actually, there was Indian Americans there, but this
yeah,
particular person I was telling you about earlier was a Chinese American, and it was funny. It was at a Chinese American bookstore, and they had invited me because I think they found a lot of commonalities between Chinese Americans and Indian Americans, and they're also this in Berkeley. Eastwind Books is located in a very very sort of Indian heavy part of town,
I see.
and so a lot of their clientele are Indian. But yeah, there was this Chinese American in the front row about my age, and she was doubled over laughing harder than anybody else. And so I actually stopped the reading and said, "What do you find so funny?" And she said that the Indian auntie section laid over and applied perfectly to Chinese American,
Okay.
quote unquote aunties. And I just thought that was fascinating. That and this is a lot of this has been coming out since I wrote the book, that other immigrant groups have such similar experiences. Maybe we're not as unique with some of the funny things that we go through.
Right. So obviously the Russell Peter phenomena fits in here, right? Because he does this kind of Pan-Asian, slapstick,
Right.
where he has Indian Americans working with Chinese Americans, and they both kind of get into their own idiosyncrasies. He's of course very hilarious with that.
Right. Right.
So why do you think the aunties are so relevant and dominant in the Indian family scene?
Um, well, I think at least in my house, it was sort of a matriarch. My dad was gone a lot working when I was growing up, um, and so I think my primary, caregiver at the time was my mom, and I think that's true. That was true for my wife, who's of Punjabi Indian descent as well,
Hmm.
and so I think you end up noticing maybe more idiosyncrasies from your mom than anyone else, and they're the ones that make sure you're doing your homework and push you and make sure you're not spending too much money. And then this concept of legendary Indian frugality that I write about comes out. And I think, at least in my generation, aunties were quite the disciplinarians. With their fist or their hand or their chappal or anything they could use to strike you.
And almost everybody is an auntie, right? Because by extension,
Right.
you can use the term for even, let's say, a close friend of your mother's who is really, your mother may refer to her as a masi,
Right.
but then the general term is an auntie, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And, we were when we went to India. We had all these different aunties from different parts of the family, and then here as well. And so you sort of begin to notice some commonalities that they have that maybe are funny to you. That they seem to know the family tree inside and out. They can connect two people in milliseconds of time. They can figure out the connection between this person and that person, and describe to you the life history of everybody in between. And they go to the store with stacks and stacks of coupons, and so there's a lot of just funny idiosyncrasies that I think made for fun writing.
Right. So here are some questions here in the Indian home that you get into. Some
Right.
typical questions. A non-Indian asks you, so are you an Indian? Namaste, right? You fold your hands.
Right.
See, I can greet you in your own primitive language. Is that how it's interpreted sometimes by people who are taken off, found off guard, sort of don't know what to say?
Yeah, I think, some of the questions that we got asked as kids are not necessarily the same questions being asked today. Sometimes, yes, but I think people are much more enlightened about Indians and Indian culture. Certainly when I go to the Bay Area, people are tremendously knowledgeable. They don't ask silly questions anymore.
Right.
But I think in the book it was fun to talk about, and maybe an Indian kid reading this in Ohio might get the same questions today because maybe there's not as large an Indian community there.
Right.
But when I was growing up, people would ask you the most basic of questions, and sometimes as a child, you don't really know how to answer them.
Right.
And then later you think, I probably should have given a really sarcastic answer to that question.
Yeah, there is that scene. I don't know if you've seen Karate Kid, the recent version of
Right.
Karate Kid.
I did.
The kid is going to Beijing, and he's boarding a plane, and he looks over to a Chinese guy,
Right.
and he says, "Hey, can you translate this for me?" And the guy looks over to him and says, "Hey, dude, I'm from Detroit." And
Right.
and the plane takes off, and you're ready for what's to come here. Sort of the cultural translation or the humor in between sort of the different languages and idioms people are speaking. And then, of course, the common question people always get is, "Do you speak Indian?"
Right.
Of course, there's
exactly.
no language, right? Or do you speak Hindu, for that matter?
Right. Yeah. Those are two questions I cover because,
Yeah.
when you're a child, you get a little bit irritated. You look at the people asking the question, saying, don't you know anything? You want to ask them if they speak American, for instance.
Right.
But yeah, I think there's just there wasn't a lot of knowledge or understanding about Indian culture especially that when they ask you questions like, "Do you speak Indian?"
Right. So now, and then, of course, why do you guys worship cows? So what do you say to that?
I think I said something sarcastic in the book, but I think as a kid, I don't think I knew what to say, and particularly because we were from a Sikh family, so even the very little I knew about Sikhism certainly didn't translate into a knowledge of Hinduism.
No, I thought your answer was quite good, actually. First of all, cows are awesome. Second, Indian cows produce chocolate milk.
Right.
And Indians love chocolate milk, and chocolate milk is sacred because it's brown like our skin. That
I
is
think
hilarious. I mean, I could tell my child to say that next time.
I think when you're being asked absurd questions, it's and that's maybe not as absurd as do you speak Indian, but I think if you're being asked an absurd question, occasionally it is fun to give an absurd answer. And these days, I absolutely give an absurd answer. People still ask me what tribe I'm from, and occasionally, and so I'll think of something funny to say, or they'll ask me what caste I'm in, and I'll make up some name of, like, I'll say the jalebi caste. I don't, my family, we didn't really know much. I didn't know much about the caste system growing up, so I didn't know what to say to that.
Right.
So I'm in the jalebi caste.
Right. That is funny. Jalebi, by the way, for those who are watching, is not a caste. It's a sweet dessert that you have after a hot meal.
Right.
Now, of course, people do still get this question: why are Indian people so smart?
Yeah. Do you get that question?
Well, no, I get that sometimes, but not all the times. You probably get it more often than I do. No, but do people still get that question? Or
I think people do ask that question, and it just strikes me as an odd, funny question to ask. I think, I'm saying, well, obviously they must live in a cosmopolitan area and have experience with a very select group of Indians, and the Indians that are even in this country in the first place are already a very self-selected group of Indians. The way that, it takes education and money and resources to get here and to get a green card or an H-1 visa. And so I think we're a very self-selected group. And even then, in the cosmopolitan areas, especially like in the Bay Area, people think that we were just born, and then 10 minutes later, we're already planning our first high-tech startup.
Yeah. So I heard an MC who's a broadcaster on the East Coast, host an event,
Right.
and she started off this was an Asian American Business Award, and she started off her sort of opening by saying the top 10 reasons why it's cool to be Asian. And of course, the top number one reason was, she said, because people think you're smart even when you're not.
That's true.
Without opening her mouth. Now, of course, the room was, breaking out laughing. That was funny at the time. And I think it is true still, the stereotype still holds that you think that all Asians are smart, even though a subset of them are actually, on TV and pontificating about things, or writing books, or engineers and doctors and so on and so forth.
Right.
So I guess it's a good stereotype to have.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I think if you and I had lunch and we were having lunch near a hospital, somebody might come up to us and ask us if we're cardiologists.
Right. Exactly.
That would be the assumption.
And the spelling bees. So what is this phenomena with spelling bees? Indian kids like scoring high on them, at least lately, right?
Well, lately, yeah, for sure. And I think, I can't remember when this came out, but there's a documentary on spelling bees not long ago. I think maybe in the last 5-10 years, and we saw it. And one of the most memorable characters was an Indian gentleman who would just put his son through the paces day and night to prepare for the spelling bee. And so I think,
wow.
I guess it's become a source of pride. It's become another academic, accomplishment to check off that, you won or placed well in the spelling bee. I think it just goes to the values that our parents have, which I think are good values for the most part, in that, it's important to study and be academically gifted and accomplish, well in school, and then go on to a very successful career.
Right. So
and I think spelling bee fits in with that.
Yeah. So Indian restaurants, you have some funny examples here of Indian restaurants. So why is Gandhi's garlic naan non-violent?
Well, I think I was proposing some names, and non-violent would be the name of the dish. NAAN-violent.
Right. And then Seth Rogan Josh.
Seth Rogan Josh. Right.
Right. Which Rogan Josh, of course, is a lamb dish. But if you put the name Seth in front of it, of course, it becomes an Americanized version of a dish. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, there's a famous actor named Seth Rogen.
Right.
And so I just smashed those two together. So yeah, there's a lot of.
And of course, Ann Curry would be very funny as well, because people think she's Indian, but she's not, right? Curry is a Chinese name, right?
Right. I think it would be nice to name a dish after her.
Right. And aloo gobi desert.
Yeah, if it's on the dry side.
Right. And tandoori Salman Khan. How does that work?
These are very bad puns that you're throwing at me that I happen to write.
Well, you've given them to me, so that is funny. I find that funny actually. Chicken makhni.
Chicken makhni.
I see. Chicken makhni.
Yeah,
made
double
very
makhni.
little chicken. I see. Got it. All right, very
Yeah,
good.
very Punjabi.
Very Punjabi,
We put butter on anything and everything.
Exactly. Now Bollywood, which is quite the craze, right? These days.
Right.
So what do you have to say about Bollywood? How do you think Bollywood propagates a lot of these interesting cross-cultural interactions?
Well, I mean, the way that it has been absorbed into the American culture is interesting to me. I mean, the very first time I saw Bollywood depicted was Conan O'Brien had a commercial for his show, probably 10 years ago, and it was him dancing in a meadow with with a lot of Indian dancers, and he's wearing full Indian clothing. It was absolutely hysterical to me.
Okay.
And then I don't know if you've ever seen the Fandango commercial with the talking paper bags. And they had one of those Fandango commercials to buy your tickets online. And they had these talking bags doing a Bollywood. They were singing Bollywood music, trying to, basically advertising Fandango.
Right.
Now it's been absorbed into gyms where you have Bollywood classes where you do Bollywood dancing, and it's to me it's fascinating and funny. And the way movies have changed, Bollywood movies have changed is also funny to me. I mean, it used to be two people singing sweetly in the meadow, very clothed very conservatively, and today it's just the polar opposite.
So Conan O'Brien actually did that? He actually donned like a Desi outfit and danced in the meadow?
Yeah, you can YouTube it.
That would be very hilarious. Yeah, you know what? You know what happened to me one time here in West Windsor, East Windsor, Princeton area. We went to see a movie. This is a number of years ago, and the guy who was selling us a ticket jumped down the counter and started doing a Bollywood number.
Oh, you're kidding! You are kidding.
As it of course stereotypically, yeah, seriously, yeah, because he couldn't understand what it is these guys were doing, these actors and actresses were doing, and it's so foreign, at least these days, to not to the musical genre of a different era, but to very serious films, commercial films that don't have song and dance numbers in them. To see a guy proposing to a girl, by running towards her through the meadows. When you said Conan O'Brien, it sort of flashed through my mind.
Yeah, and I try to explain when I try to explain Bollywood movies to my American friends. It's hard to explain. I said, well, you know what a musical is, right? I said every Indian movie is a musical essentially. You got it. That's a starting point, and then you explain some of the themes that show up in the movies, and but I think Americans kind of find it amusing. And when I meet, because I lived in LA for 15, 20 years, you meet a lot of Armenian, and they're very familiar with Bollywood films, and some of them even grew up with them in Iran or wherever they came from.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I still run into taxi drivers who are African or from North Africa and Morocco,
right,
or parts of the Middle East, and they would swear by their name, their family name, that Amitabh Bachchan is their hero, because they've seen Devar and how he protects his mother's honor.
Right.
Okay. In fact, literally, I'll tell you a true story. A taxi driver in Boston who was, I think, from Morocco,
right,
swear to me that Amitabh Bachchan is his hero, not Rambo, because of what I just told you, because he protects his mother's honor. Right. Even though he may be a smuggler and a bad guy and what have you, but he relates to that more than to a film like Rambo.
Right. And I think because of you look at those cultural pockets in the South Asia and Middle East, and we share some of the same values, and sometimes those are distinct from American values. So I think we do have a lot of commonalities with our values, or some of the food we eat, even some of the language we use.
Right. So when you talk about careers, here you have a pie chart, and you show, of course, like half of the pie is almost doctors, physicians.
Right.
The other quarter is engineers, lawyers, and then you have Night Shyamalan in a small little sliver. Explain that to me.
I think part of humor is just over making a ridiculous point, or taking a point to its absurd conclusion. And to me, just the sheer number of doctors and engineers is staggering. And, you see at least 10, 15, 20 years ago, the M. Night Shyamalans are such outliers that, this pie chart popped into my head, and it just made me laugh.
Yeah, who, by the way, grew up in Philly, right, on the main line. And I actually met some of his contemporaries at a film preview in London. He said to me, yeah, our parents were friends. They're all like South Indians, I guess.
Right.
And the parents were all doctors and engineers. But for some reason, these boys who are friends of Shyamalan, who grew up on the main line in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, they were all into filmmaking.
Right.
And one or two of them have actually gone on and taken this up as a serious career. And obviously, Night Shyamalan has done quite well at it, right?
Yeah, he's done very well.
Yeah.
And but that's even though I joke about it, it's changed so radically, as you know.
Yeah.
In pop culture, you look at The Good Wife, ER, The Office. Indians are in very central roles and no longer cartoonish stereotypes.
Right. So what's the alphabet soup here? You have several terms here: A, B, C, D, FOBs. What's an FOB?
An FOB is fresh off the boat. So that's my we often will tease my parents. They're the generation that came from India, so we call them fresh off the boat, or FOB. And then of course ABCD, as some of your audience will know, is American born confused Desi, or confused Indian.
Right.
Folks like myself who grew up here and think they know about Indian culture but really don't.
Right.
And
And
therefore
then so the H-1Bs, the new immigrants who are coming on and doing IT work,
right.
are they FOBs?
I think so. I think they, and I hope that term isn't offensive to anyone. We use it very innocently and fun.
I think your point is well taken, which is that Indian Americans are becoming much more mainstreamed.
Right.
And you see that in media, as well as in other walks of life. Politically, of course, you have, like we were talking earlier, we have, in California, you have Ami Bera, who won the seat from Sacramento. Dilip Singh Sond, who was the first congressman, Asian American, to go to Congress. Of course, Kamala Harris, who the president said is the best looking attorney general, I think currently. And he got a lot of heat for that.
He sure did.
What do you make of that?
I think that you can't say stuff like that if you're the president.
Yeah, yesterday he joked about it. He said Eric Holder got upset when he got home.
He probably wasn't the only one.
Yeah. Anyway, so this is a great book. I recommend our viewers to get a copy. It's available online, Amazon, and everywhere else, right?
Yeah, it's in paperback on Amazon or CreateSpace. It's you can get an autographed copy from Pondicherry.com, PondicherryShop.com.
Excellent.
You can get it's in iTunes. It's in Barnes and Noble.
Excellent.
So
the author is Sanjit Singh, and the book is called "Are You Indian? A Humorous Guide to Growing Up Indian in America." I highly recommend it for anybody who's interested in being an Indophile or Indianphile, as I say, lover of India. So I thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And hope you'll come back and talk about your next book.
Sounds good. I'd love to do that. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Join us again for another edition of Asian Times TV. Thank you. Bye.